Hey everybody, it's Anna and welcome back to my booktube channel. Today I'm going to try and do a little bit of a reading wrap-up of kind of the books that I read between the end of my DIY summer reading and then kind of in the middle of or wrapped up before really starting in on my Shake-Timber and my cozy/spooky autumn reads TBR videos, which you will have already seen by the time this goes up. But I had a few books that I wanted to wrap up before that. A decent number of these were books that I had actually been reading rather slowly over time, in some cases over the entire summer, so the course of a few months. So we have 9 books to talk about today, but one of them is a DNF, and most of them I kind of spread out reading over a longer period of time. So yeah, let's go ahead and get into it. Please bear with me, I'm still recovering from being sick. My lighting is weird because the season is changing and I'm still trying to figure out how I want this lighting to work. And I'm hoping that this tripod manages to keep it from looking like the bookshelf in the background is crooked. I noticed that when I was editing my last couple videos that I filmed, it was kind of driving me nuts, but I think what happened is the floor in this bedroom is actually kind of slanted. I can't feel it when I'm sitting on the ground, but I can clearly see that my bookshelf is slanted in the background of my shots. So, here we go. Let's begin with the book that I DNF'd first. That was John Scalzi, When the Moon Hits Your Eye. This is a sort of satirical spoof science fiction novel about what would happen, excuse me, if one day overnight the moon mysteriously turned into cheese. I had read The Kaiju Preservation Society before by John Scalzi. I thought it was a lot of fun. It was very humorous, kind of a cheeky sci-fi voice that I really appreciated. And so I thought this was going to be more of the same. And it kind of was, but I will say that his choice to kind of make each of the individual chapters how a different segment of our world, like the entertainment industry, the government, the military, the scientific community, responded to the moon turning into cheese, I think would have worked better if the chapters hadn't felt so repetitive and been so short. I think that this book, for me to really have gotten into it, needed to have more of an overarching plot, tying these chapters together and these characters together. And it's there to an extent, but I got about halfway through the book and there was just really no compelling plot-related reason for me to feel like I wanted to keep reading or know what was going to happen next. And the characters weren't, this is not a character-driven book. This is a funny book that is supposed to be about just people finding themselves in an extraordinary situation and how they handle that. So I actually decided to DNF this. It just wasn't clicking for me, and I DNF'd it partially because a book that I was highly anticipating finally, after 5 months on the holds list, came in at my library. And that was Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins. So this is kind of a sequel that is really a prequel to her Hunger Games series, which I read as a teenager when they first came out. I did not read The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, which is the other sequel that's also prequel. I was not interested in the premise of that story, so I just elected to leave that one be. But knowing that we got this story telling the past history of Haymitch, who is Katniss and Peeta's mentor in the original Hunger Games trilogy, had me very interested because I really liked him as a character and I thought following kind of his arc would be amazing. And this book did not disappoint. It's one of those rare books that is a sequel written many years after the original books are written that actually has something important to say and has an artistic reason to exist. I get so tired of books or other types of media that just seem like shameless fan service or cash grabs, or we just put this in because we didn't want to lose the license to insert whatever property it is here. Like, I'm over it. I don't like that. But I trust in Suzanne Collins' writing, and she did not disappoint with this one. Some of the topics that I think really get deepened in, or like her exploration of them is deepened in this book as compared to the original trilogy, my goodness, is the further rejection of the trope of the chosen one in science fiction and fantasy, particularly when it comes to a chosen one leading a rebellion or a revolution. This book reminded me a lot of kind of the themes that the TV show Andor is exploring, which is one of the few, again, Star Wars properties that I really think is a sequel that is really a prequel and has a good artistic reason to exist and really has something to say. And I really liked the way that this book deals with the fact that revolutions and change and these mass movements are built slowly and imperfectly and over time. And that in general, like for the vast majority of these types of things, one individual person's actions in isolation is not going to fix all of the problems with the world or bring about the sudden change or be the catalyst for something bigger. Yes, in history, we have these moments that we can see are kind of these turning points or watersheds, and we can retroactively look back and see, oh, you know, like it was all building up to this because of what so-and-so did or because of these circumstances. But really in the moment, it's impossible to know what the impacts of your actions are. You can hope that the consequences will be what you desired. And honestly, that is, at least according to this book, what should really inform the decisions that you make. Act in line with your values and don't give up. And also don't think it's just your individual responsibility to fix everything. That is not how mass movement works. That is not how we affect mass change. That happens through collective action and us pooling our different skills and talents. So really enjoyed this book. I would recommend it if you are a fan of the original series. I would say maybe the weakest part of this book was just the Hunger Games games themselves. I feel like that kind of had to be in this book because we know that Haymitch is like the past victor, and at the time of the original trilogy, he is the only living victor from District 12. So I feel like that kind of had to be in this book because of the premise of the original trilogy. But honestly, I just thought that a lot of the things that happened surrounding the games and outside of the arena were the most impactful for this book. So there you go. All right, let's keep up with the theme of revolution and social change. So for the end of, what month was this that we read it? August? Yes, the end of August, my nonfiction book club read this book by Timothy Tackett. It is called The Glory and the Sorrow, A Parisian and His World in the Age of the French Revolution. And this is a pretty slim book. It's less than 200 pages, published by, I believe, yes, published by Oxford University Press. And Timothy Tackett is a historian of the French Revolution that was working on a much larger in scope and in length book about the revolution. And while he was doing research for that, he kept encountering letters in the archive written by this guy named Coulson. Coulson was a sort of middle-aged French lawyer that was writing letters to his friend in the countryside during the years leading up to and during the revolution, going kind of into the Reign of Terror period. And Tackett was so fascinated by everything that he was reading in these letters that he couldn't get Coulson out of his mind and decided to write his own book just about him. So this was a truly excellent academic writing book. I will say, I would caution you against reading this by itself if this is your first book about the French Revolution. If you don't know very much about the French Revolution, I think just reading this book without getting some broader historical context is probably going to be very confusing and not as fruitful. For me, a really good entry point to learning about this was actually Mike Duncan's Revolutions podcast. He has a several episode series on the French Revolution that is excellent quality, very approachable for the layperson. But yeah, this would be a lot to try and parse and figure out if you didn't know much about the French Revolution. But because I did, I was really able to enjoy and get a lot out of the the explication that we get of what an everyday person's life was like during this time. Somebody who was not a big political mover and shaker. Someone who was kind of always involved as just an ordinary person in some of the big events, or who would just miss the big events because he didn't want to go be a part of the crowd. So no, he wasn't there when the Bastille fell, even though it was not that far away from the apartment where he lived. He was a fascinating individual character to get to learn about too. It was fascinating watching this man's political consciousness develop from being a person who was a very devout Catholic and royalist who became convinced that if Protestants were allowed to practice their religion in public, that it would be the end of society as we know it. Contrast that with later in the book, after he's exposed to a lot of these revolutionary ideas through pamphlets, he begins to really espouse the ideas of liberté, égalité, fraternité, and sees that as being this sort of pan-humanist philosophy that guides his life, in addition to his devout religious faith. It is also interesting seeing where a lot of his critique of the king and the aristocracy is or is not consistent with some of his wider beliefs. So, really excellent book, especially if you're interested in the topic and you want like a window into just an ordinary individual's life during this time. Moving away from revolutions now for a little bit, I have a kids graphic novel that I read. This is Lightfall, The Girl and the Galdurian, which is written and illustrated by Tim Probert. This is a really sweet adventure about a friendship between this young apprentice witch named Beatrice and her Galdurian friend, Cad. They go on some adventures together to try and figure out what's happened to Beatrice's adopted grandfather, who is a pig wizard that went to go investigate a magical item and has not been seen in a little while. A lot of this is sort of standard middle grade fare about overcoming your fears and anxieties to be brave enough to take a stand for what you believe in, to protect the ones that you care about, and to find inner confidence. And I just thought that was very sweet. This came recommended by Alina from Eclectic Reads. I will link her channel down below. She's awesome. If you like watching my videos, I think you'll love watching hers. So please go give her a follow. This is a series. I am not sure exactly how many books are out in the series right now. I think I want to say it was 4 or 5 when I looked this up on my library's website. And I will definitely be continuing with the series, probably after I finish some of my September reads, because that's looking to be a pretty involved month. Okay, next up we have a few mysteries that I managed to read. One of them was my most recent John Wyndham novel. This is Foul Play Suspected, and this is a novel that he wrote in 1935, so kind of in that interwar period. That is a bit of a mystery. We follow this woman named Phillida who has just recently been widowed by a man that she despised and was apparently very cruel and not a good match for her. She goes back home to England to reunite with her father, only to discover that her father has been missing and the entire house has been locked up, boarded up, etc. Mysterious things start happening as she and her cousin and friend begin to investigate her father's disappearance. They start to believe that it has something to do with the scientific research that her father was conducting and the sort of arms manufacturers and other military types that want to co-opt that scientific research for their own ends. It's kind of amazing reading this in 2025, knowing that, you know, John Wyndham clearly had the looming Second World War on his mind when he wrote this, but this is much more of a cautionary tale, like none of that is a foregone conclusion yet. It was very chilling, though, to read this sort of hypothetical discussion that one of the characters has about, see, this is why science shouldn't be co-opted by the state or by the military, because in the book, this character says, the next war could see Britain developing this chemical weapon that they drop as a bomb on all of Europe and it kills millions of people. And of course, what actually happened was different, but we did see the United States develop nuclear weapons and drop 2 nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We just marked the, I believe, 80th anniversary of that. And that's just a very sobering reminder that none of this was really a foregone conclusion. You know, I have only ever known a world where we had nuclear weapons, but that is not how it had to go down. This reminded me very much also of the play Copenhagen, which is a play about a hypothetical meeting between Werner von Heisenberg and Niels Bohr, who were two atomic scientists. And it was kind of a hypothetical meeting between the two of them where they discuss a lot of the ethics and morality of what it would mean to develop the science that could lead to such a catastrophically destructive weapon. So this was good. I definitely think it was one of the weaker Wyndhams I've read so far, but I think honestly that's because this was written earlier in his career, and so it still deals with a lot of the ideas that he's interested in and the themes and topics he likes to explore. But as a writer, he hasn't developed them quite as much in this book as he has in some of the later ones. But it was still good. I would still recommend it. And next we have the next two Anna Pigeon novels, A Superior Death and Ill Wind. These are both written by Nevada Barr, and they follow Anna Pigeon, who is a law enforcement park ranger, and she goes around to different national parks in each book, ostensibly just to help with search and rescue, but she always winds up having to solve murders and crimes and things like that. In A Superior Death, she has to investigate this unexpected dead body that is found at the bottom of a shipwreck in Lake Superior. This one is very creepy and eerie. I remembered a little bit of this from when I read it way back in the day, but none of the whodunit. I will say that these books, I normally don't do a ton of content warnings for things like mysteries, because some of that is plot related, but there's also kind of this understanding that if you're reading a murder mystery, there are going to be things like death and violence in them. So I feel like that kind of goes without saying. But for A Superior Death in particular, I wanted to also call out that some of the topics the book deals with are a lot of alcohol and alcohol abuse, and that's kind of a theme throughout the series, is that Anna, the protagonist, really struggles with misusing alcohol, and that's a big part of kind of her arc as a character, is her trying to figure that out. But this one also deals with topics like incest, child sexual abuse, and intimate partner violence that are pretty integral to the story without going into too much detail on the page, but that does come up. So be aware of that if you decide to read this one. My main critique of A Superior Death was just that I found that a lot of the attention given to the cast of quirky side characters seemed like it came at the expense of plotting the mystery itself. The mystery was almost secondary to the eccentricities of all of the side characters, which is not necessarily a bad thing if you're mostly just reading it for kind of the weird wilderness vibes, but I was kind of hoping for a little bit more to sink my teeth into for the mystery. Ill Wind, I think the mystery was slightly better plotted. I was able to figure out exactly what the murder mechanism was. This one is kind of unique in that it's not obvious that it is a weapon or something like that. It is a little bit different, but I was able to figure out what it was. Some of that I think is because I also have that wilderness medic search and rescue training, and I'm just listening to people rattle off stuff about the murders, and I'm just you know what? Here's what I think it is, and I was right. But my, I guess, other sort of thing to call out in Ill Wind, and just keep in mind that these books were written 30 years ago, so when I have this as a critique, I'm not holding it to the same standard as I would if this came out now, but some of these books have some problematic depictions of disability in them, either using outdated language to describe certain disabled characters, or kind of having this uncritically examined attitude towards the disabled characters, that they're sort of pitiable objects, which, you know, obviously I don't like, but this is just something to be aware of in the book. It feels kind of authentic to what I think the character would have thought at the time. So in that sense, I don't think it's necessarily the author trying to be overtly offensive or anything. I just think it's really just an outmoded way of approaching disabled people. So yeah, there's that, but I enjoyed that. These books are kind of just fun treats for me because they don't take me very long to get through, and I just like trying to solve the mystery alongside the main character. Let's wrap up next with the 2 anthologies that I finished. These ones I probably was spending the longest amount of time reading. One of them was a book that I talked about in my reading books for Disability Pride Month recommendations video, and that is also one of my most anticipated reads. This is Moving Mountains, Writing Nature Through Illness and Disability. This is an anthology of essays and also poetry, creative writing, edited by Louise Kenward, and this was published in England, but I believe through some sort of like arts grant. It's like British Arts Grant or something like that. Nope, Arts Council England. Close enough. But yeah, this is exactly what it says. Like most anthologies, some of these were better written than others. In particular, I found a lot of the essays to be better written than more of the like poetry or fiction or more experimental type stuff. A lot of that I just don't think was at the quality that I would have expected. Additionally, this anthology, while it does treat like with authors who have a variety of disabilities, I think like a significant number of these writers all had very similar or the same disabilities, and I think I would have been interested to hear more from writers who had sensory-related disabilities or mental health or intellectually developmental related disabilities. I think that could have given this more of a diversity of voice that I was hoping for in an anthology that was like this. However, I am of course incredibly glad that this exists. I hope that this sort of sets the standard that we need more nature writing by disabled writers, and we honestly need more access to nature for disabled nature enthusiasts. Nature is interesting because it is like one of the places that is not inaccessible by design per se, in the same way that like a human being can design a building and the design of that building can be inaccessible. However, many disabled people do need some additional help or accommodation in accessing the outdoors. So it was kind of interesting seeing that like tension explored between like there is nothing by design inaccessible about nature, yet we need to do more work to make nature more accessible. So good read, I'd recommend. And then the final book is A Nature Poem for Every Summer Evening, which is edited by Jane McMorland Hunter. This is a sweet little anthology of nature poems that you read every summer evening, and that was from June, July, and August. So my husband and I read these together, if not every night, then we tried to get through most nights. Didn't quite keep up with the whole thing, but this kind of spans time periods from, you know, sort of the early days of English poetry up until like maybe the mid 20th century. There weren't too many contemporary poems in here, and my guess is that's probably because a lot of these were taken from the public domain, so I'm wondering if it had to do with licensing or something like that. But this was nice, and I know that this series is 1 of 4, so it's for all of the 4 seasons. So if you like poetry, or if you just want to like get your feet wet and sort of sample different poems from different time periods without like having to commit to one author's particular style for the whole time, I think this would be a good book for you. I enjoyed it. So yeah, those are my sort of transitional in-between time books. I want to know if you have read any of these, or if you had sort of a bookish project that you were kind of wrapping up. Maybe it's something that you've been reading for a long time that you finally finished, or maybe it was like meeting a TBR goal or something like that. So if that's the case, let me know in a comment down below. As always, thank you all so very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.